Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hello and welcome to episode 344 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and today I'm joined by Caroline Evers Endicott. Caroline has been working at the Priory since 2020 and holds a master's degree in addiction psychology and counselling. She is also a registered member of the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. Today, Caroline shares her insights from her work as an addiction therapist, along with highlights from her new CPD lecture, Introducing Therapy for Addiction, which is now available in the Counsellor CPD library and includes a 1.5 hour CPD certificate. So with that said, let's roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and a very warm welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, episode 344. And my colleague Rory Oakes and myself, Ken Kelly, are delighted to welcome you to our three topics for today, starting off with ethical sustainable practice, where we're delving into a new world, and it's the ethical use of AI in therapy. We're then going to practice matters, as Rory has already mentioned. He spoke with Caroline around introducing working with addictions. That's an important topic, so definitely be listening to that one. And there is a lecture on that as well in our CPD library. And then into student services, recognizing you, your students on your academic journey. And here's the thing, if you're listening in real time, you're coming right to the end of your academic year. Today we're going to be speaking about learning never stops, planning CPD as a counsellor. So there you have it. That's the areas of interest for today. And I guess, Rory, we're going to be handing over to me to introduce the topic of ethical use of AI.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. So I'm looking forward to what you have to say, Ken.
Picture this. You're sitting across from a client who's just shared their darkest moment with you. Raw, vulnerable, trusting you completely. Now imagine that conversation, those sacred words, are being processed by an algorithm you've never seen, stored on servers you'll never visit, analysed by systems you don't understand. Sounds like science fiction. It's not. It's happening right now in therapy rooms just like yours. I'm here today to talk about something that's been keeping me up at night and should probably be keeping you up too. The invisible integration of AI into our therapeutic practice and how we navigate this brave new world without losing our souls or our clients' trust. Here's what might surprise you. AI is already in your practice. That appointment scheduling software, AI, those video calls with clients, AI powered, even your spell check, yep, AI. And that's what we're here to tackle today. Not to fear AI, but to understand and master it. To use it ethically, responsibly, and in a way that actually enhances rather than threatens the sacred work we do. Let me ask you something. When your client shares their trauma, their shame, their deepest fears, what are they really giving you? They're giving you their trust. And trust, once broken, is almost impossible to repair. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. When we are working with our client's name, email, or any other details, we operate under data protection laws. Sadly, many AI tools are built in countries with less stringent data security standards that fall short of UK GDPR standards. When you click agree on those terms and conditions, and let's be honest, who actually reads them? You might be consenting to your client's most intimate thoughts being stored halfway around the world. Think about that for a moment. Your client's life moments shared in confidence with you, sitting on a server in who knows where, accessible to who knows who. This isn't about being paranoid. This is about being professional. So what do? Well, I've distilled this down to 4 essential questions you need to ask about every AI tool in your practice. First, does this tool comply with UK data protection laws? Not just any laws, our laws, the ones designed to protect our clients. Second, does it have robust security measures? We're talking encryption, access controls, the works. If they can't explain their security in terms you understand, that's a red flag. Third, does their data handling align with our professional ethical guidelines? Just because something's legal doesn't make it ethical. And fourth, where is the data stored? If it's bouncing around internationally without proper safeguards, we have a problem. Now, about 3 minutes in, you might be thinking, this sounds overwhelming. Maybe I should just avoid AI altogether. And I get it. But here's the thing. AI is powerful and we can use it ethically in the service of our clients. We just need to exercise discernment when we are choosing what tools we use. I have created a critical thinking sheet that helps us counselors ask the right questions when we are selecting a tool for practice. I have also built a tool that you can use to check if an app has the ethical and legal protection you want for your clients. I will share a link at the end of this where you can get those for free. Let me pause here and share something with you, something that perfectly illustrates the point I'm making about AI serving people rather than replacing them. Now, you may have already suspected what I am about to tell you. This voice is not Ken speaking. I'm DigiKen, the digital twin of Kenneth V. Kelly. For Ken, being autistic means that showing up live can feel like holding up a mask, effortful, draining, unsustainable. So I'm here to carry his message without the cost. This is AI being used ethically, purposefully, to amplify human capability rather than replace human connection. And that's exactly what we need to achieve in therapies. The question isn't whether to engage with AI, but how to engage with it responsibly. Because when we get this right, and we can get this right, AI doesn't replace the human connection in therapy. It enhances it. It frees us up to do what only humans can do, to truly see, to deeply understand, to authentically connect. And this is crucial. We must never let algorithms replace our clinical judgment. We must never let data points replace empathy. We must never let efficiency replace humanity. And with that, I will hand back to Rory and real Ken.
Well, there you have it, Ken. When I first heard that when we set the podcast up, I was literally scratching my head because I thought that has to be Ken, but that was all done by AI, and I just thought it was absolutely incredible, and I also thought just how far AI had come in such a short space of time. Before November of 2024, no one was really talking about it in the way that we're talking about it now, certainly not in therapeutic circles. And as you've proved with that remarkable use of technology, AI is come of age. You know, we heard a lovely conversation from what effectively is an AI that sounded like you, Ken.
Yeah. And the thing with AI, you know, I would never use that kind of technology to interact with a client because it's not ethical to do so. You know, the whole point of counseling is it's a human to human interaction. And I really hope that it will continue to stay that way. I thought that within the protection of a podcast, with you and I framing it correctly, we could pop it in as a novelty that DigiKen was able to deliver some content, but it's not something where I would represent myself in to someone else and kind of pretend it's real, because I mean that's the other side of AI is it can damage, and it's like anything. We've spoken about AI before. It's the application where we have to think and consider, and the whole point of this is to consider AI and therapy. And I'm not talking about the part of the therapy where you're interacting with the clients. And I'm also not talking about taking clients' notes or information and processing them in AI. I'm talking about using AI to build your practice, your website, your directory listing copy that describes you, touching up your headshot. There are a number of areas where AI is being used to leverage what we do in day-to-day business. And at the end of the day, if you're a practicing counselor, psychotherapist, and you're selling the service of counseling or psychotherapy, helping, there's a business side to that. And although I don't see AI as being ethical in client contact, I think that it is ethical for us to use it smartly to grow our practices, to have a wider reach, to reach the clients that we know will resonate with us and may need to use our services. And there's a lot of magic tools, magic bullet tools that are on the market at the moment, AI for therapists, and it's going to tell you how to build out a session plan, and it's going to just drop in your client's notes, and it's going to give you a summary of those notes. That for me is not ethical unless they can show how that data is being stored. But as per DigiKen, you know, we don't want our clients' details out there. But there are areas we can use AI ethically. And if you're thinking of looking at an AI tool for you in your practice, and that can be anything from just using Zoom, go and use the free tool checker that I've created. And Rory, back, I can't remember the date, but it's some time ago now, both yourself and myself, when AI started to show its head, we went, this is going to impact counseling and psychotherapy. And we reached out and we brought together an expert reference group around a table. Sitting at that table are representatives from British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, National Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, UKCP, ACTO, some education providers, all talking about the ethics around AI and its use. So, and within those meetings, we've been looking at what is the guidance, and the critical thinking guide that the free tool kind of maps to is the best thinking from that group so far. And it's going to kind of guide you through what you might consider if you want to use a tool in your practice, Rory.
Absolutely, Ken. And I think that, for therapists, it's very overwhelming, isn't it? You know, certainly for me, I'm dyslexic. It's no secret, and I use AI. I write my ideas down in the best way I can, and then I put it into AI, and AI will give me, maybe some copy, or maybe some, a way of writing things that are legible and understandable by others. And that is fine. And you talked about copy on websites, counsellors wanting to write adverts for their practice. That's great. But as you say, Ken, there is a darker side to AI, and that is, we'll put your client notes in here, and where are those details being shared? I mean, those details. Let's be honest. Client notes can only really be accessed under UK GDPR, and most data protection legislation in different countries, with express permission of the client and or a court order. And putting them into an AI where you don't know where that information is being stored, who's seeing it, what's it being used for, is, I would agree with you. I think there is a question of ethics. I think there's definitely a question of data protection. So this tool is absolutely fantastic. It gives you a kind of ethical decision-making process where you can, if you're thinking of using a tool, you can put it in to Ken's AI interrogator, for want of a better word, and it will come back with a number of answers to whether it's suitable for you to use it with clients. And I do think that with new technology, there is a tendency for people to say, well, why do we need it? Why do we need it? We never had it before, so why do we need it now? And in a very short space of time, people say, I couldn't live without that.
Yes.
Because we become adapted to it. So, if you're sitting and maybe shaking your head at home, or I hope you're not shaking your head if you're driving, because you need to keep your eyes on the road, eventually will become part of our lives. I remember the same conversation with mobile phones, Ken.
Oh,
people
yes,
say, why do we need a mobile phone? I don't need to be contacted when I'm walking the dog. Now you can't prise the flipping things out of people's hands. You really can't. So it's going to be, AI is going to be with us forever. And as therapists, it's about making sure we're making the best decisions of how we use that technology, as always, in the service of our clients.
Yeah. And, that mobile phone analogy is really good. I remember looking around me at the time, and specifically when smartphones came out, that was like a step too far for me, a smartphone. Yeah, I could do the old Nokia where you could phone someone and text them and play Snake. But as soon as it went to a smartphone, I thought, I'm not going to the smartphone. That I'm not going to do. Well, I tell you what, I've now got an iPhone, and it's as smarter than me. And so is everybody around me who had that same thinking at the time. The technology becomes like a tsunami where if you don't uptake it in some way, you kind of can get left behind. And this is particularly true with AI. We can look as therapists, and I've seen the comments on the group, and I understand them, and I understand where they're rooted. They're rooted in concern for the best outcome for patients, clients. At the end of the day, that's what this is about. So the intentions are good. But there's some that may look at this and go, I'm not interested, I'm not getting involved with that. That's a no-go area for me. It's a sad day when AI shows itself in counselling and psychotherapy. Well, the truth is, at government level, definitely here in the UK, there are papers that are outlining to the commissioners of counselling and mental health services how AI will be integrated into those, and how the tools will be used ethically. And they're advocating for opening our eyes and training in AI to learn how to use those tools, because we're going to be required at some stage, in the same way as we now required to use a smartphone, to be able to use those tools in service of our clients. And I heard it referred to recently of, it's like running a marathon. We're all on the same kind of thing. You might work out a bit more and have a bit more fitness. But if somebody comes along with a bicycle, you're not going to beat them no matter how dedicated you are to running that marathon. You're just not going to beat them because they have a technology that outclasses yours. And I'm not suggesting that AI is like a bicycle to running. It's more like a motorbike or a car. It really leverages what is possible. And I think we need to be having these discussions. We need to not shy away. We need to put learning AI into our CPD, and and then using it in ways to serve. I saw, when AI first came out, the first thing you hear are all the horror stories and how it's been used for crime and by the dark forces, Rory, to scam people. And, just listening to DigiKen earlier, when I played that for my wife, she said I wouldn't have known the difference. And I can make DigiKen say anything. I just type in what it needs to say. So I could say, hey, I'm stuck and please send me some money. And that is how scammers work. And AI is used by those dark forces. Somebody has to stand up and use it for good, for the betterment and the change of humanity, the chosen few. And I see us as counselors, psychotherapists, as being called on to do that. Because we do that anyway, we do something that is rare, where we actually listen to other people and we are there in service of them. And that is rare in life. And we get an opportunity to define how we will use AI in our practice, in service of those clients. And it's a very, very powerful technology. Get the tool. It's free. And you can get that by going to counsellingtutor.com. Click on the podcast tab, find your way to episode 344, and there is a link to that tool right there. You will need to have a paid-for version of ChatGPT to be able to use the tool, because it does run on the GPT API, so it runs with GPT being the mind behind it. But if you do have an account, go and use that. And let's do good with this new technology that is coming, ready or not, Rory.
Absolutely, and just for the listener, Ken, that is really you that's been saying those things, isn't it? It's not DigiKen, is it? That's you.
Yeah, DigiKen doesn't know how to laugh yet. Actually, I just saw that there's an update just this morning where they say they can make them laugh now. Whoa, yeah, it's an interesting time that we live in. May we live in interesting times. There's a blessing for you. So there we have it. Our ethical, sustainable practice. We now move on to Practice Matters. Rory's already introduced Caroline. We're going to be speaking about an introduction to working with addiction, Rory.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Addiction is something that we're seeing more of, may it be alcohol, or may it be sex, or it could be mobile phone usage. There are many routes to addiction, alcohol, just to name a few. And it's one of those areas that really I don't think is touched on in initial training. So I was really pleased to speak to Caroline Evers Endicott, who's made an absolutely fabulous lecture for our CPD library called An Introduction to Working with Addiction. I caught up with her, and this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
It's not uncommon for therapists to work with clients who present with issues around addiction, whether that's substance related or behavioural. Yet offering practical support in this area often calls for a specialist skill set, one that isn't always fully covered in core training. My guest today is Caroline Evers Endicott, who's created a CPD lecture for our library titled Introducing Therapy for Addiction. Caroline brings both professional expertise and lived experience to this essential area of practice. So, Caroline, thank you for joining us.
Good being here. Thanks for having me, Rory.
Now, having worked in services with people who've got addictions, it can be tricky, and I don't know what your view is, but I think that probably most counselling courses don't provide enough underpinning for a therapist to work effectively with addictions, because it presupposes that therapists don't know exactly what addiction is. It doesn't come across. So would that be your view? Would you say that it does need some specialist or further CPD?
Yeah, so you're right in that it is probably true that the courses that are out there don't go into detail or depth or length enough about addiction because it is seen inverted as a specialism. And of course, it's difficult and complex. And yes, hence my motivation to put this lecture together to provide a bit more information, but also to encourage people that it's obviously doable, and that we have invariably, if you have taken a course, and a university course or otherwise diploma course, that you've got most of the tools already in your box to be able to meet somebody with addiction. Yes, you might want to take more CPD, and I recommend that and do reading around it, but also to encourage people not to freak out at specialism and I need to refer them somewhere else, or I'm not good enough, which is where we end up often. But yeah, CPD obviously always recommended, and there might also be people who might have special interests from their own experiences, personal or from within the environment, where family, friends, and so on. So yeah, I would recommend CPD, but would also encourage people to consider their skills already there. Hence, I speak to that in my lecture as well.
I think that's really reassuring. And I think I'll pick up on a point that you raised there about not freaking out, not referring people on. I mean, from the client's point of view, they may not disclose they have addiction. It may be that they come for something else, and then as trust builds and as the arc of therapy develops, they say, well, I have an addiction, and I think that what you don't want is the therapist to go, oh, we'll have to refer you immediately. Because how would that feel for the client? It might feel really, really bad. So thinking about the tools that therapists already have, and I think you speak to this in your lecture, what kind of tools may a therapist kind of draw on when a client kind of discloses or presents that they have addiction?
Yeah, so you're quite right. Just to reiterate that people might not say from the beginning, and it might come up in the course of. Somebody might present with anxiety, and it might come in the course of, and then there's that relationship already there. So basic point already, the basic relationship and having created an alliance with the client is already your tool. You're in the best spot to be with that client at that point. And they might not even have an underlying, they might have a relapse, or they might have developed something. So you having already worked with somebody and addressed some of the issues or the problems that they have, you're already in the spot. So that's number one. You've created that trust, right? So the trust building is the first one. And also, coming back to basic tools, I call it Rogers in the room, meeting the client where they're at with the empathy that we come with into the room, with the non-judgment or that presence that you bring and that curiosity that you bring is huge. Meeting somebody in there where they're at. And people might already have other modalities that they've trained in. I mean, CBT is one of them. Motivational interviewing is the other. But that comes around. It's not only an addiction. When it came out of the addiction therapeutic journey, but it's obviously across many health conditions. So motivational interviewing, big one already. DBT skills, mindfulness skills, already there that might be part of somebody's toolkit, as we call it, or modality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really basics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because you write in your lecture that alcohol problems are amongst the most stigmatized conditions. When you say to someone, as I have many times, that alcoholism is a illness, people always come back and say, well, it's not like cancer, is it? But it is my experience of working with people with addiction. It is a form of illness. Any addiction, I think, is a form of illness. Mm-hmm. And as you say, thinking it from that point of view, and also thinking about how you react when someone uses names for street drugs and that type of thing. Because if you're not used to it, if it's not in your sphere, it could bring a lot of kind of transferential issues up, couldn't it?
Yes, quite, and being aware of your count. So going back to basic tools, the counter-transference will invariably come into the room when you have your own tools to deal with that. Exactly, and your own. We're talking about we're non-judgmental. Well, we're human beings, aren't we? So we come with our own experience and so on. So, and meeting somebody who's it's a mental health condition indeed. And whether or not people call it a disease or an illness, or it might worth a discussion. Well, how do you see that, right?
Yeah.
We plonk a label onto somebody, as we know with other conditions, then that might be difficult, or it might be helpful indeed. Some people, might identify if I have a disease and it's alcoholism or addiction or whatever. So that's worth already an exploration of where people think of themselves as, and within the context of society. I don't know, they need environment and society, but the problem of stigmatization is still so prevalent, and the studies go that alcohol is over and above schizophrenia or depression in terms of stigmatization, which creates so many barriers to people saying it. I've got a problem. So that's we also meeting when somebody says, again, going back to this trust, I think I've got a problem with whatever it is, porn or cocaine or booze, then it's bashing through a barrier here. So inviting that, having broken through stigma, but that's what we come with, and that's what the clients will come with, having been stigmatized in the past, stigmatizing themselves, putting themselves in a box, right? And not wanting also, if you think of drugs, let's say drugs in this case, that might be their way of somehow coping, and then saying I take that away from you or you mustn't is a huge thing, because that might be the only way they regulate themselves, the only way that they survive their trauma. So.
Yes, I've actually met quite a few people, not actually as a therapist, but as a member of the general public, who use the term street drugs and alcohol as a way of self-medicating other mental health issues.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things is you say, I've got a friend who uses a variety of street drugs, including cannabis. And I said to him, do you have a prescription from the doctor? And he says yes. He said, but it has so many side effects, and also they can never get the dosage right. Now, I'm not saying that people should give up the doctor's medication and go down and see their local dealer and get a variety of chemicals, or even go down the pub. But it does seem a bit of a theme that some people will use street drugs or alcohol as a way of self-medicating.
Yeah, and that is true, and it's being met, I suppose, through the scheme of licensed cannabis. This is recognized, so it's under prescription, it's under supervision, from obviously medical professionals. But self-medicating, huge topic, right? People then fall into, and unknowingly so as well. There might be, and this is coming with neurodiversity questions as well, self-medicating ADHD, undiagnosed ADHD, dealing with, impulsivity and or dysregulation in other cases. So yes, self-medication is a huge topic, and therefore needs also be addressed. And how can we do that in an empathic form, constructive form, to not take away the medication without other skills, without other knowledge and tools. So again, I think that's a good discussion to be having with somebody in the therapy room, right? And not to take that away.
Absolutely. I like in the lecture you talk about, before we go there, to ask people to do a therapist to do a bit of self-reflection and self-evaluation. Can you say a bit more about that? Yeah,
that's partly speaking to stigma, but also partly bringing in that we probably recognize in all of us that we might have something, bringing understanding, meeting somebody in their addiction, bringing understanding that we might all have propensity to be beholden to something or obsessed with something or not having control, inverted commas, over something. And I give, I think in the lecture and often when I speak in the seminars and so on, take the simplest piece. If I take away your phone from you for the day, how would you feel? What would you do? Would you be rooting around for it? Would you feel bereft? Would you feel lost without it? Or, there's other examples of what would you say. It's that we can admit that we all have somehow the ability to top our lives up with something else to cope with certain situations or cope with life generally. And that's clearly to induce empathetic view, but also that we also all not very different from one another, which also speaks to the stigma, right? There's a continuum of belief. It's just a continuum of using or behaving, and those of us who are not, say, addicted to cocaine, we might be the other, somewhere along the continuum, and might be beholden to on our Facebook or our Instagram. So this just speaks to the humanity of it, really.
It's about being very honest, and I think for me it speaks about, to use a biblical term, he who's without sin casteth the first stone. This idea. I mean, I've just polished off half a bar of Toblerone, so I think we can definitely say that chocolate is quite addictive for me. You talk about the phone, and you say, would you own up to it? Are you asking people who are therapists who work in addiction to really be honest about their own addictions and maybe to kind of go internally to do an audit before they start working with clients with addiction?
It's probably a good start, just as we do self-reflective work, of course, right? A start to see whether or not we have any, is the word prejudice or views, but also to, go internally and say, is there something that I do also that I wish I didn't?
Yes.
Or I've tried to give up coffee, sugar, my phone, and it's really bloody hard.
Yes.
Suddenly we find it's like, well, I tried, but I failed, and now I'm not going to try again. Yeah. And you might meet somebody like that in the room, and to having an internal reflection on that gives a little bit that increases understanding, and again, meeting somebody where they're at. But then manifold when you're in the throes of hard drugs or sex or whatever, which obviously it's ever harder to the more one is involved with it and the more repetitive it is. But the simple process also to understanding the process of, well, I was on a phone and then suddenly I got Instagram and now I'm constantly down the scroll hole. So that's a process. And you try to get out. Yeah, but we're all there.
Yeah, it's true. What a wonderful term. I've never heard it referred to as the scroll hole, but I'm going to borrow that.
I think my niece taught me that.
I think it's really, really true. And all speaks, whether it's your phone or in my case the Toblerone chocolate, or whether it's other drugs, it all speaks to altering brain chemistry and your brain craving that of which you're addicted to. I think one of the interesting things that I thought was very helpful in your lecture, there's so much here that really, really is helpful. But one of the things that I thought was really helpful was you talking about the different approaches to recovery. You talk about 12-step or evidence-based or CBT third wave. Could you speak a little bit about the importance of a practitioner understanding where clients may be at the moment in terms of their own recovery cycles and what models they use?
Yeah, so there's obviously a breadth of approaches, as we know, the evidence, but there's also, when we talk about the 12-step, it's actually, as we know, it's a layman's model. It's
Yes.
the biggest AA and all the derivatives of it. It's the biggest self-help group in the world. And therefore, a huge piece of resourcing from the client. And of course, they might already have been in AA meetings or otherwise fellowships. So that already comes with some resource, with some somewhere to lean on for the client and to have guidance and social contacts and so on. And like I said, the client might already come with that. And then to understand their for one, what does 12-step mean? For the therapist, you can read into that, and it's out there, right? So lean a little bit into the history and story from the client, but also read it from the practicality point of view. Specifically, 12-step is very prominent in most of the rehab approaches, of course, still. So it'd be out there. Invariably, somebody would have come across it either in the community or even in rehabs. And otherwise, models we might have come across, the client may have already had previous therapy and therapeutic experiences in that field as well. And then if we overlay that with in motivation interviewing, we're asking of what has helped in the past. Say somebody had a lapse. What's helped in the past? Well, that was very helpful. Okay, let's go with that. And what was not so helpful? So that's resourcing. It helps resourcing yourself as a therapist, obviously, as well as the client, or invariably doing some psychoeducation around that. And clients might try, so somebody's maybe has an addiction and is not as new to therapy, being able to try out different things. One thing might not stick with one client, might the other, as we know in general in therapy. SMART, just taking 12 steps. Obviously, mostly abstinence-based model. Yeah. The SMART model has got moderation in it, and that's more CBT-based, for example. So that there's different options for different folks. We know that not all, there's a different path for all of us in terms of our recovery.
Yeah, and I think the having the knowledge, or just sort of working knowledge of the different pathways. Yeah, I think that links to the relationship, because if someone's talking about being in AA, you may say, have you got a sponsor? Or, have you found a group that fits you? Have you, because lots of people move from group to group until they find a home group that may be useful, and talking about step work, that type of thing. And I think it for me, it forms a form of allyship with the clients, that you know about their wider life in recovery, as opposed maybe just to work on the here and now. The here and now is important, but somebody understands, they're sitting in front of someone who understands the mechanism of recovery that they're engaging with.
That they have chosen or engaging with. Yeah. And language is important in that. Yeah, in the 12 steps, there's some language about it, but that's possibly also not different to anything else that we might meet in the therapy room, of when we speak with youth, for example, or different cultures, or that we get accustomed to the language of the what the client uses, but also a point of curiosity, right? So again, by going back to Rogers, I am interested in you. Tell me about what happens in your 12-step meetings. What is helpful there? Who do you how do you work through things? And of course, being interested in the holistic surrounds of the client holistically, but also their surrounds and their relationships and their resources, basically.
Yeah. And I think, for me, addiction isn't just who the client is. There's a lot more. Addiction may be very pressing for the client, but not just seeing the client as a drug or alcohol user, but seeing a client holistically. There's more parts to them, I think, is important, because there's usually a reason that people get into drug and alcohol misuse, and I think once you start doing the work, that becomes evident in the therapy room. It could be a trauma, or it could be something that's happened to them. So I guess my question is it important that therapists just don't see the client as just one facet, that they're an addict?
Yes, of course. Seeing the client as who they are, how they tick. What has it's not what's wrong with you, but what's happened to you. Classic question, right? And as the whole person that they are, and but also how they've come to that. You just pointed that out. There's something's happened, and they stepped on the path of addiction. What was before? Who were you before this process ensued? What did you experience before? And invariably, there will be underlying, or most likely underlying difficulties in life, in earlier life, in childhood, trauma, and so on, or otherwise incidents or events that happen to the client. And that is important. That's what shaped the client as well. And we're taking history of a client in any case and understanding them from bottom up, from top down.
Yes.
It also forms that relationship, and from that relationship, the trust to be working on what is, and how can we how can we bring change about? Because then you understand your client, what their motivations are, what they want to change, how they want to change, how they can change, and what makes that possible for them, and also instilling hope in a way. When you understand the person who's sitting opposite you, you can gauge of what their hopes and their fears are, and their motivations and their possible barriers of course as well, or their motivations not to stop. Therefore, what's in that, which will also be in their larger history.
Yeah, it's back to Rogers, isn't it? He talks about phenomenology, the philosophy of lived experience, and I think what I'm hearing is that, you're seeing the client in a number of ways, a number of aspects, trying to understand them, trying to get a sense of, what led them to addiction, what leads them to staying in addiction, and also what they want. It's ultimately what they want. Some people may say they're in addiction and quite happy to be in addiction, and then and they may be coming for something else, and they just say that as an add-on, or just to kind of expand on their story. I found this conversation really, really interesting, and I think that anybody who's listening, if you're a qualified therapist and you're interested in working with clients with addiction, this lecture is going to be really eye-opening and really useful for you. Introducing Therapy for Addiction by Caroline Evers Endicott is in the CPD library now. And just before we go, what do you hope that people will take away from your lecture? What do you hope that people who view your lecture will come away with? Well, for one, message that you have got probably more tools than you already think to take away maybe the mystique, or misconception that the addiction is something very different or highly or differently skilled or specialized to work in, but also an invitation to learn more about it as a general theme, as we would do anyway. We learn so much from our clients in other topics. Learn more about it, but also some of the taking away some of the snippets of that I've given, some of the tools that will probably already be on your fingertips, and to learn more about it, ask some questions, speak to your colleagues. Hey, I've got inviting this collaboration as well. And of course, inviting maybe discussions or questions in some of the discussions you've got in Counselling Tutor or otherwise, and people discussions that they have, and inviting curiosity as always. Well, I think on that hopeful note of inviting curiosity, Caroline Evers Endicott, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you to Caroline. Thank you to you, Rory, for reaching out, holding those all important discussions. It's an important topic, and it's something we see more and more It's like life is addictive these days. You know, phones are addictive, gaming is addictive, social media is addictive. So these are things that weren't around when I was a lad, and now we have addictions to those things. We're pretty addictive animals, so we're going to definitely see it as it. I'm not suggesting that we're animals. I'm busy doing a check on the voice. Interesting animals, interesting humans, I think is a better word for that. As you know, we do have an addictive tendency, and we're going to see it in practice. And if you'd like to learn more, of course, as it was mentioned, there is a lecture by Caroline in the CPD library on preparing to work with addictions. If you're a member, log in. It's there for you. If you're not a member, go to counsellingtutor.com, click on our products, and you can see our CPD library membership options there. And that is Practice Matters. We now move on to those student services. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Can't tell you how many times Rory and I have heard counselling students say that learning skills and knowing that they're using them effectively is really, really challenging. The reason for this is because we don't get to see another counsellor using skills in a real live session. In reality, this means that we're asked to learn something that we can never see demonstrated in a real setting. And it's no wonder that many of us are left feeling unsure. If you want to see counselling skills used in real sessions by qualified therapists, so this is real sessions, real presentations, and real use of skills, then go to counsellingskillsacademy.com. There's some free videos on skills, including a full live session that you can have a look at. Gain the competence and the confidence of knowing you're using your counselling skills effectively. Just visit counsellingskillsacademy.com. And today in Student Services, we are discussing that the learning never stops. I'm thinking, Rory, as I'm saying this topic, there's many students with their fingers in their ears now going, no, I thought it was at the end of my studies or the end of my year. What do you mean the learning never stops? So let's frame it in a way that makes it make sense, Rory.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I'm sure that, you know, as this podcast is going out at the end of the academic year in 2025 in June, I'm sure there'll be lots of students who'll be, you know, getting their bath towel and their swimming attire and hoping to sit in, you know, either in freezing cold UK or going to sunnier climes and really putting their, you know, studies down. But in my experience, a lot of students would come to me and say, oh, it's a long break, Rory. It's a long break. Is there anything I could be doing in between? Or, more to the point, there'd be students who are qualifying. They'd qualify to get their diploma, and then they'd say, well, what's next? What do I do next? And it's quite true, the learning never stops. We're, you know, as therapists, we are obliged to do a minimum of 30 hours a year of CPD to keep our practices fresh and update our knowledge. And, you know, I think if I was just graduating, certainly in the UK with my diploma in counselling, I might be thinking about what gaps can I fill that weren't covered in training. And there are quite a few gaps. Although training is very comprehensive, the real world of therapy asks us to have a lot more skills, I think, and a lot more understanding than perhaps we get in first trainings. So I think there's a number of areas, Ken, where if you're qualified or heading towards qualification, you might want to think about some CPD just to get you skilled up and quite frankly employable. You know.
Yeah. And there's two sides to it. The one is employable, the other one is private practice at some stage and what that might look like. And what we often hear from graduates is they get their degree or they get their diploma and they go out smiling into the jobs market and then start knocking on doors where the jobs say, well, you've got to have at least 2 years of experience before. Yeah. And it can be really, really disheartening. And the reason for that is exactly as Rory has just said there, that when you leave your counselling training, you have a really good underpinning knowledge and foundation of the modality that you have learnt and your ability to deliver skills within that modality. But there are elements that fall outside of that, where additional training or CPD kind of fills in the blanks. And one area, I'm just going to call it out, is trauma. Trauma is going to present in your practice all the time. But if you look at your learning journey, you would have spent very little time going at any depth on trauma. And there are specialist interventions of how you would recognize trauma and handle trauma. We've done lots of podcasts about trauma where we've discussed that. So trauma is a great area to kind of give a fuller picture to your practice. Online and telephone training is a must if you're looking to broaden the horizons from your locality to a much wider area. At the moment, if you think of how it would have been, say, 10 years ago, you'd have a therapist in an area and they would market to that area, and people would come by car or by foot or by bus or some transport to their practice room, and they would sit in a room together, and then they would go their separate ways. And you were at the if you lived in a really small town, it was a bit more difficult to get clients than if you lived in London, where you would maybe have a stream of clients because of the population. Now we get to fish in a much bigger pond because we can deliver therapy online, but there's a learning process. During your training, you might have touched on it a little bit, but the ethical bodies require 80-hour certificate, that you really deep dive into that area. And at Counselling Tutor, when we built a CPD library for the reason of kind of filling in those gaps, and there's hundreds and hundreds of lectures in there, all presented by top experts in their field, speaking about specialist areas. And what tends to happen, we see this quite often, is somebody will join the CPD library, log in and go, I'm just overwhelmed. It's like being in a library, which is just surrounded by books, and I can pick any book, and I don't know which book, and where should I start, and what should I do first? And I think that the following formula will stand you in good stead. When looking to do CPD, look at two words, ethics, and then look at your sustainability. And what do I mean by that? So ethics. So if a client comes in and they present with underlying trauma and I miss that, it's not ethically wrong, but I'm not best serving that client. So if I went and did trauma-informed practice training, then I would be better able to meet those clients' needs. So therefore, ethically, I'm on a firmer standing. What do I mean by sustainability? Well, there are some employers that would ask you for trauma-informed practice training before bringing you on board. So it makes you more employable. It opens more doors. And that's more sustainable practice, whether you're in a career or running in private practice. Certainly EAPs might only refer through trauma-related material to someone who is trained in trauma. So ask yourself, am I looking at ethics or sustainability? So if we look at online and telephone counselling, the ethics are what plays out online is different to what plays out face-to-face in a room. It just is. It's very different. We've spoken about that again on many podcasts. So ethically, I'm on a better and firmer standing. But from a sustainability point of view, I now have a much bigger catchment area. I can see clients from further away. I can service clients that maybe have mobility challenges. So I can make my practice more sustainable. And what we try to do in Counselling Tutor, and what you have led us in, Rory, when you build our courses as the academic director, is you focus on those two areas. Our trainings are trauma-informed practice, online and telephone counselling, supervision training, and working with neurodiversity, specifically autistic clients. And every single one of those specialist training courses has a really strong balance of ethics. You want to be there for that client group and those presentations and ethical firm standing, but they open new areas, new client groups, so it offers more sustainability within your practice. And I think that that's a great way to frame CPD, other than I've now got to spend an hour and a half and I'll just pick any topic and just consume that content and then tick on my audit report that I've done the CPD. How is it building you and your practice going forward? Those are my thoughts, Rory.
Yeah, I think you framed that very well, Ken. And I think for me, it's about skills. Sustainability is about the skills you can apply in the therapy room. Yes, we're a knowledge-based sort of cohort of people. We learn theories. We learn about the history of counselling, and we learn about how clients can present with different issues in their lives. But actually, as counsellors, we are, as Ken sometimes says, it's when the rubber hits the road. And when the rubber hits the road, it's about skills. How do you take that knowledge and then transfer it into skills that you can use to help transform people's lives? And, Ken's alluded to the fact that I build the courses. And one of the things that I'm absolutely dedicated to, and I would say slightly obsessed with, is application of skills. What can you use in the therapy room when a client presents with A, B, or C? How can you best serve that client? Because we're in service of clients. We're there to serve them. How can we best serve them? And, I think having knowledge is good, but having skills, something that you can help a client with, or be able to work with their particular presentation is absolutely essential. And, just to pick up what Ken was saying in terms of the online and telephone counselling, one of the big things is safety, making sure that, if something goes wrong and your client's 200 miles away, that you're confident in being able to have some sort of plan to get them assistance. And in terms of trauma, how could you help a client who's having a panic attack in the room because they've talked about something that's so terrible for them? What practical things can you use to help that client? So we're now generally, I think, as a society, in a skills-based economy. They used to talk about knowledge-based economies, but actually it's skills-based. If you employ a plumber and the plumber comes and says, "I've got a leak. I could tell you the history of Victorian plumbing and Greek plumbing." That's fantastic. Can you mend my leak? Well, no, but would you like to know more about Victorian plumbing? You want someone with a spanner and someone who could stop that leak. Now, I'm not suggesting that therapists go around with spanners fixing clients, but hopefully it was that easy, Ken. It would be great if we could just turn a few things and we go off into a happy life. But skills, what I'm trying to get across is it's skills-based. We need those skills to be able to, apply them in the room with the client when they are in distress or when they need a particular form of help. Support.
Yes, bravo. And if I could, I would stand up, I would cheer, I would clap from what you've just said there, Rory. And I graduated from my counselling training many moons ago, Rory, and within the years that I was in practice, I did a lot of CPD courses. I went on CPD courses, and I can't tell you how many of them were just speaking theory to me, telling me what it is and what the research says and what's happening in that person's brain and how this reacts and da. And I was looking for those practical applications, So I want to go back to what you said about trauma and the person having a panic attack in the room. Learning the brain chemistry of why that is happening, it's important. We need to understand what is going on, but it's not going to help you to bring that person back to the here and now and calm them down. That is a practical, applicable skill. It's an outcome. And that's the main thing that matters within that moment within the room. So if you say to the client, and you can do psychological education, I guess that's it, but what's happening in your brain at the moment is this and this and this. They don't care. They can't breathe. Their heart is going. They think they're going to die. The last thing they need is a theory lecture. They want kindness, holding, and a resolution to that. So I think that applicable skills is so important, and that is why you, Rory, have built into every one of our courses a actual element where you work with peers and that you have some form of guidance outside of theory or self-directed learning. So it becomes vicarious, that you're teaching others. You're telling them what you did, and they're telling you what they did. You can ask the tutors, and it brings, I think, the theory to life. And I think that's important. So these are considerations when choosing your CPD. And the other thing I would say is look at the outcomes. Look at the learning outcomes. So again, I can use Counselling Tutor as a reference. So our qualified practitioner CPD library, like I say, hundreds of lectures in there. No lecture is a person talking about what they are passionate about. So you haven't got, let's take walk and talk therapy just as an example. You haven't got a practitioner talking about walk and talk therapy because they're passionate about it. Well, they would be passionate, but that's not helpful to you. Every lecture is mapped to learning outcomes. So at the beginning, you're going to say, from this lecture, you're going to learn this and this and this and this. And at the end of the lecture, when the information and the techniques have been shown, you recap those learning outcomes. You should now be able to do this, this, and this. So a great way of deciding whether that's CPD you want to do is look at the learning outcomes. Just open the slide pack, have a look. What's the learning outcomes? Oh, yes, I'd like to bring that into my practice. This is the right lecture for me. So look at learning outcomes of courses or CPD that you want to do. The last thing you want to do is just watch a talking head at some conference talking about some topic and the deep research of it and I say that, but there are people where that is important. If you're doing a research project, then you do want to go and hear somebody speak about the deep research. So it's about where you're at, what outcomes, learning outcomes are going to be the best fit for you for ethics and sustainability within your practice and your career as a counsellor or psychotherapist.
Yeah, three things, Ken. Application, application, and application. I think the best
I see what
learning,
you did there.
You see what I did there?
Yeah.
Yes, application, application, application. I think that the best learning and the most fun learning is where you could do something and it works. Think about any learning you've done. Maybe you're fond of cooking and you watch YouTube about people cooking things and they tell you, I don't know, how to bake fish. And you think, I've always wanted to do that. And you try it and you sit there and you eat your fish. You think, that's brilliant. I did that. I someone taught me how to do it. Far better than someone talking about the history of baking fish, from the 14th century onward. We get excited when we can exhibit and practice skills that work. And the best way of learning is learning that gives you an application and an applicable skill. And, you hear it. I hear it when my colleagues go, you never guess what I tried in the therapy room the other day. And this is what happened. The client was panicking and we did some square breathing and the client managed to regulate themselves. And not only that, they could do that outside the therapy room if it happens again. That is what we're about. That is our practice in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Serving and helping.
It is. And I guess we just learn to serve at a deeper level as we go through the arc of our career as counsellors, as psychotherapists. And I'm just mindful, Rory, as we're coming to the end here. I was just about to say you've been listening to episode 344 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, but I'm just recognizing this is the end of the season, isn't it? And maybe we say goodbye and thank you so much to every single one of you that has listened to us. If you're listening in real time for this season of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, this is the last episode for the current season. We pick up again in the new academic year. If you're listening in real time in September of 2025, that will be. If you're going back through past recordings, that doesn't matter, does it? Just go to the next one.
Yeah. And I'm sure there'll be people listening to this with their sun hat and their sun cream and their sunglasses sitting on the beach watching the tide come in or go out. And what a great way to listen to a podcast. But yeah, if you are in real time, break it up, take that self-care time, enjoy your families, enjoy your time. And if you're lucky enough to be able to go away, enjoy that, because it's all part of, I guess, recharging our batteries. Therapy is, I think it's a tough road to walk if you're a therapist, be it a student or a qualified therapist. And we need downtime. We've talked a lot about self-care on the podcast. So have a super break, super holiday. We'll be back again in the September of 2025. I know I've got my sunscreen and my sunglasses and my bucket hat that I'm going to be wearing. I just hope that no one sees me, Ken.
And with that, Rory, I feel that it is now appropriate to say anything that you've heard today as discussing. And want more information, go to counsellingtutor.com. Any of our courses or our libraries are available from the products tab there. If you want to get the download tool, it's on the podcast tab and it's episode 344. And this has been episode 344 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started with ethical sustainable practice, and Ken Self talked about the ethical use of AI and a fantastic tool that Ken has made available to us all to check out if any of the AI apps, the many AI apps, are in service of the client, they're ethical, they're data compliant, and also just a little gentle nudge that it's a technology that we'll all be leaning into. And I get in a few years' time, people will say, I never knew how I managed without it. So get over there. Remember, it's counsellingtutor.com, podcast tab, episode 344. That link's there for you now. Go and have a play with it. Ken's put a lot of work into producing that, and it really is a fantastic resource that you can use. Moving on to Practice Matters, we talked with Caroline Evers Endicott, an introduction to working with addiction, some really, really useful ideas, and a fantastic lecture. And then we moved into student services. Learning never stops. Planning your CPD as a counsellor. What gaps do you need to fill? What application of skills would you want to acquire to be in the service of your client? And finally, thank you so much for your shares. I know a lot of people share the podcast on their socials or share them on email with their friends. We love it when people share the information. If they found it helpful, other people might find it helpful. So share far and wide. And until the next time, where we'll come back hopefully off holiday, a little bit more relaxed. Stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.